going on, guys? Junior's Fishing Company with another little streamer jig today. So here I've got a 1/16 ounce Northland tackle tungsten crappie king jig in olive. These are awesome jigs. I just bought a few different kinds of these and I'm going to do a couple different streamer-ish videos. I really like these because they already have the eyes built in, but the tough thing is trying to build a body that doesn't look really off from the head. You can kind of see this head slopes down, so you don't want your body to be super crazy thick because it just looks kind of off. So I've got 140 UTC right here. This is Watery olive, and the only reason I'm using 140 is because I'm going to do a dubbing loop, and so I just want some stronger thread so that I don't break off while I'm spinning. So this is just a 2 ingredient fly. That's all it's going to be. I'm going to bring my thread to about my barb. You can go back a little bit farther, but really it's just how long you want this bait to be. This bait for me will probably be about 2 inches, so it's going to be a little bit of a bigger panfish, whatever, streamer, whatever you want to call it. So I've got 2 ingredients here. I've got Arizona minnow hair in olive done. This stuff is really, really long. It's probably 3 inches long, so I've actually cut it in half. I just stacked it and cut it. So minnow hair, this stuff is pretty cool. And then just traditional Senyos laser dub in olive. I really just added this for the color and the bulk. This stuff bulks really easily. This stuff lays down when it's wet. It's really thin, and so I didn't want this bait to be too thin, so I added this, and this is just a little bit darker because I wanted to try and match the color of this head, but it's really hard to tell if it's going to match perfectly. You want to make sure and get these materials. I dip this material in water before I tied it on because it's always lighter when it's dry, so that's when I ended up adding this darker stuff. So I've got my dubbing loop ready to go. This is probably about, I don't know, 3 inches or so long, and I've already kind of trimmed this side. I'm going to trim it down just a little bit more, but this is a really messy dubbing loop because this stuff does not want to spin, and so you gotta kinda, you'll see in just a sec, you kinda have to pick it out quite a bit. So I'm going to put just a little bit of dubbing wax on here. This is just Wapsi. It's not like the super tacky stuff. I'm just going to put a little bit on just because when you're picking this out a bunch, you lose a lot of materials, and I intentionally put a lot in here. This is a lot of materials for a small jig like this, but I'll probably lose at least 30% of these materials when I'm picking them out and stuff like that. So I'm going to get this slid right in. I always make my dubbing loops a little bit longer than they need to for some reason. I don't know why I do that. So I'll sneak that out, and I've already got some stuff falling out. So I'm going to just kind of separate this a little, but I don't want to too much just because I think this is a size 12 90-degree jig hook. I think that's what it said online, but there's really not a ton of room on this jig, this shank. So I'm gonna trim this closest to the thread, closest to the hook, and then I'm gonna leave some of this excess up on the top for when I'm up here to add a little bit of bulk to that head. But I'm just going to trim this up just kind of at an angle. Just be careful not to trim your thread. So I'll get this spun up, and I'm just going to spin it enough where all of it will be kind of spun. So I'm just going to grab really just 2 things. I've got some Velcro and a small comb, and then I've just got my dubbing pick. So I'll just pick this out, and I'm just going to kind of take my time with it, going back and forth between the comb. I don't want to do too much right now, just because those materials aren't super well in there. Eventually I'll be able to use my Velcro But right now I'm just being pretty gentle with it, just to kind of tease those materials out so that they don't get too caught up. And then I'm going to spin it, and then I'll pick it again, and I'll do that as many times as I need to. Alright, so I think I ended up spinning this and picking it like 3 times, and now I've just kind of folded all my fibers to one side, and I'm really just going to start by wrapping this. You just got to be really careful with the hook, just because this stuff really wants to catch the hook. So I'm not gonna end up using all of this dubbing loop. I end up just adding more, because about halfway through I can tell if I'm gonna need to do some even tighter wraps, just to kind of get some bulk into that body. But I actually made this one a little bit thicker than the other ones that I've made and practiced with, just because they're not coming out super. I would rather have this bait be a little bit too thin than too thick, just because it is supposed to, you know, I'll be targeting crappie and bluegill, but you'll catch bass and small walleyes and stuff like that on something like this too. I just want to make sure that I'm not building up a ton of thread by that head, especially with this 140, because this is going to be plenty, and I really just don't want a big thread collar on this, because this was the greenest 140 I had. And you can always color, you could use white and just get an olive marker too, but so I'm going to just get really tight wraps here, super close to each other, just so I can add some bulk at this head. And I'm going to just get to, now this is getting really thick right here, and this is exactly where I want to be with this material right by the head, because it's just a little bit tricky to, you know, with these heads, the shape of them, you don't want too thin or too thick. You kind of want to just find a happy little spot right in the middle. And I'm going to do one more. I'm going to get this thread out of there, and then I'm going to come to the top right here, and this is going to look pretty ugly until I get this bad boy picked out. So I'll come with my left hand with my thread, and I'm going to cord it up, because I just don't want, if any of a collar. I'm going to go as close to my head as I can. I almost said bead because I'm so used to using beads. I'm just going to give it maybe 3-4 good wraps. You could almost, before you twist this, you could have switched to 70 denier, but I don't care that much. I'm going to get that trimmed off, and I'm just going to do a few wraps right here just to make sure that that stuff is down. And you can see I really don't have much of a collar on this. I just want to make sure that those materials aren't going to pop out, and then I can get a whip finish going. Just 2 or 3 turns. You really don't need a ton of whip finish. But this jig's going to be pretty durable, so you do want it to withstand some pressure. And now I'm just going to take my, just a little, I think this is Stanfo Velcro brush, and I'm just going to start brushing this because all of those materials are matted down. So I'll just take a little bit at a time, and I'm just going to comb out that dubbing loop. And while I'm combing this, the biggest thing I'm looking for is when I get it, this is getting pretty close, I'm going to pull this out, and there's going to be just some random really long fibers, because again, this minnow fiber is long. It's probably 3 inches or longer, and so I just want to make sure that this bait isn't going to have just a few strands that are like 4 inches long. But when I get it wet, I'll also be able to tell too. So you can kind of see, even when I pull back, it's kind of making its shape. I'm going to comb this just a couple more times, and we're going to get this wet, and we're going to see how it turned out. Alright, so it turned out to be just shy of 2 inches. Northland tackle, Crappie King jig in olive, dubbing loop with Arizona minnow hair and Senyos laser dub olive. This stuff is really cool, and you can see how much darker this bait is now that it's wet. So again, if you're trying to match a bait to a bead, or in this case just a painted tungsten head, you want to make sure that you know what the materials are going to look like wet. Most browns, in my opinion, end up looking black, especially if you use like a dark brown. It ends up looking black anyway, so you got to be careful. You can see this light green ends up getting a lot darker, and that was the goal, just to match this head. Another variation of a little minnow streamer pattern, perfect for crappie and bluegill. You can see that the front of this bait isn't any wider than this head is. That's what I was trying to be intentional about. It's one of the biggest things I was trying to do, is making sure that this body wasn't much bigger or bigger at all than this head. But I actually bought a few different variations of these Northland tungsten jigs. I've got a couple coming down the pipe. So Junior's Fishing Company, like and subscribe, drop a comment below, something you want to see, colors, patterns. We'll see you in the next one.